Welcome to the Pedagogy Primer podcast. This episode features a discussion about feedback on student work, how you respond to student assignment, exam, and other assessment submissions. Your comments to students, written or verbal, can help them get more out of an assignment after they've completed it, especially in accordance with your course learning goals and objectives. Instead of just being a chore, part of the bigger chore of grading, you can make feedback an essential learning situation within your course. In this episode, we're considering feedback on student work, or the comments you make in response to the work they hand in, or their contributions to course activities, such as in the classroom or online discussions. Feedback can be a frustrating subject for teaching faculty. It's frequently time-consuming and requires enormous intellectual effort. Some students can't seem to get enough of it, while many others ignore it. But properly composed and delivered feedback can be a powerful mode of course communication. Plus, good feedback persuades students that the professor is committed to their success and not just a course operator or caretaker. And by reflecting on how we do feedback, we might escape a common tendency where feedback becomes a written justification for grades lower than a perfect score, or 100%. At its most cynical, feedback becomes just an effort to discourage grade complaints by students. These implicit rationales are understandable given the practical realities of teaching, and many students come to think like that too, based on their prior schooling. But you might frown to even hear me describe those ways of thinking about feedback. It's probably not what you like to think you are doing. We don't simply want to judge student products. Instead, we want to help students be better creators, thinkers, and professionals. So let's see if we can get feedback on student work back to being beneficial and constructive. When we improve our feedback practices, we might develop a powerful new pedagogy. Rather than a chore that takes away time from real teaching, it is teaching. In a lot of disciplines, we might think of lectures, demonstrations, discussions, laboratory exercises, and other activities as learning situations, when and where learning takes place. But properly crafted feedback can be as much or more of a teaching and learning opportunity, and in some courses, the major learning situation, week after week. We become coaches who help students develop thinking and doing skills instead of just completing the grading chore. And if we improve our confidence as mentors by improving our own feedback skills, we might not find grading or providing commentary such a miserable chore after all. And we might shift some of our effort away from lower impact teaching methods to make time and energy for working with our students through the assignment and feedback process. But carefully crafted feedback need not mean long hours of writing or typing comments. Maybe less is more for both you and for your students. Organizing, scaling, and prioritizing your feedback can make it easier for students to benefit and quicker for you to compose. Before we get into it further, I should note a few things. I tend to use the term assignment generically, and you might have in your mind's eye a writing assignment or math homework. But a lot of what I say applies equally to classroom exams. Also, in this episode, we're assuming feedback is from the professor to individual students. There are great ways to do classroom feedback that even involve students working through problems with their work in groups or as a class, but that's really a topic for another episode. And finally, we will leave for another day how to assign, assess, and provide feedback on group project assignments, which is a worthy topic of its own. But in both the case of classroom feedback exercises and group assignments, some of what I say here generally applies. Even so, our topic inevitably shades into other subjects like assignment design and grading. Plus, we cannot possibly consider every type of assignment in every discipline. But hopefully there's some things here to get you thinking about your professional reaction to student work. Obviously, grades like number scores or letter assessments, A, B, C, D, F, and variations, are a form of feedback, but they are other things too, and besides, maybe we rely on them a bit too much to signal to students how they're doing and how they could do better. So, while we'll touch on grading here as far as it's a form of feedback, we may revisit the topic more comprehensively in a later episode. Okay, but how can grades, numbers, or letters be a form of feedback? Officially, they indicate a level of competence in a subject or a process. In the lowest grade units of a course, such as a multiple choice question, a simple Boolean, 1 point or no points, can be all the feedback that's needed. Above that, they are admittedly blunt but potentially still effective instruments. For example, an A should convey appreciation for a job well done. At a course level, or with respect to bigger projects, many students understandably value a letter grade, especially from professors they respect and admire. But in many cases, grades are what Susan Brookhart calls task feedback. They tell me, the student, how I did on an assignment. They don't provide details about my process for producing work toward that assignment. That's why students should receive more than a grade. Some faculty and pedagogy experts ask whether a grade is always necessary, or if at times it's a distraction. Is it possible to have students submit work solely for feedback without any grade? Possibly, especially if students are highly motivated and realize that your feedback may be essential for later high-stakes graded work. Some students ask for this proactively, even when it isn't a formal part of a course design. It can be a nuisance, in fact, when you're already busy and a student asks you to read a draft. When you agree to do this, you are a great professor committed to their learning. But you can also set ground rules for this beforehand. For example, if students are interested in pre-grade feedback, they may need to submit by a deadline to give you time to turn their submission around with meaningful feedback that they have time to employ. You may also stipulate that work they submit have in place several elements before you will look at and comment on it, a checklist such as we'll discuss in a few minutes. This keeps you from having to struggle with fragmented, insufficiently developed work that doesn't yet merit commentary and prevents students from wasting your time. It's okay to recognize that in a lot of classes, and maybe those you teach, students for various reasons are unlikely to participate in officially or unofficially voluntary exercises. If it doesn't have a grade value or is not a condition for a later grade, many students will likely decline to hand in work just to get your feedback. So don't feel bad if you decide to attach a grade value to work for which you expect to provide feedback. In a sense, you're reversing the unsavory habit we mentioned earlier. You're using a grade as an incentive for them to read your feedback, rather than just using feedback to justify a grade. Feedback is also inseparable from assignment design, or how you will assign work for the students to do. That's also a topic for another episode. But for here, we'll just briefly discuss a few elements. In this case, course design means that you develop assignments, quizzes, exams, and activities for students that help them learn and help you determine how well they're learning, all according to your course goals and objectives. When we first started teaching, we often borrowed assignments we were given as students or from the courses of colleagues with more experience. But a way to improve any course is to think carefully about how your students can develop as they do work and get feedback on that work. As you design your course, consider how assignments can be somewhat repetitious opportunities to learn a set of skills, albeit with different content or substance. So, for example, your students might complete 5 lab reports or 8 reading response essays throughout the semester, which have quite similar format. This affords students an opportunity to follow your feedback garnered on earlier assignments to do better with each subsequent assignment as the course goes on. Johann Kuller calls this a feedback loop, where students are given regular feedback, low-stakes grades, but told that their overall course grade is based on improvement. We'll discuss more how targeted feedback can work with this scheme in a moment. Or you might break up the skills you're trying to teach in a sequence and have smaller assignments that each focus on a particular skill or skill set, or gradually accumulate all skills over the course of the semester. This is commonly called scaffolding and is a traditional method in writing intensive courses built around term papers. So I have my students write a proposal, then an annotated bibliography, an outline, a few pages of draft, perhaps a complete draft, and then a final paper. At each stage, my grade criteria and feedback are directed at certain skills or perhaps a gradually growing but repetitive skill set as the students' projects develop. In general, try to design your course and assignments for maximum effective feedback as soon as possible. You will likely need to assign some assignments or set their due dates later in the semester. Fair enough. But feedback at that point is often what Barbara Walvord and Virginia Johnson Anderson call autopsy mode. If your feedback on assignments at the end of the semester is concise and actionable, students may put it into practice later in their life. but it will be especially compelling to students if they can employ your feedback directions in assignments within the same course. For this and other reasons, instructional designers generally recommend having many frequent assignments worth lower grades, rather than a course consisting of a few big assignments or exams, each worth a significant amount of grade value. That sounds like a lot more work for you, the instructor, and if you aren't careful, it will be. But consider how you can make assignments smaller for you, too. For example, can you break up a set of learning objectives over a smaller series of assignments, each of which is easier to grade and assess since you're not having to consider a variety of criteria on each? Or can you develop a rubric to help you consistently grade a set of assignments based on most of the same criteria, even if content knowledge changes a bit with each assignment? A highly effective tactic, albeit one that requires fine-tuning to make it manageable, is to plan to track each student through a series of assignments. That is, review the feedback you gave them earlier in the course and assess them on their progress in following that feedback. This can help you have a better handle on how and how much each student is really learning in your course and help them develop a sense that they are making progress. To do this without getting overwhelmed, stay tuned because in a few minutes we'll talk about ways to keep feedback focused and actionable. Excellent students work to accomplish their professor's intent, but their success depends on good instructions from the professor. You need to be sure your assignment instructions include exactly what you want them to do, and to the extent that you have specific guidelines, how you want it done. This includes a sense of scale and scope. For example, should they write a few paragraphs, or work through the semester to craft a multi-page article based on extensive research? Are they to spend 2 weeks completing a project or just demonstrate command of a particular skill or procedure in a single nightly homework assignment? You might also include a model assignment submission that either you wrote or that was submitted by students in previous semesters. If the latter, you need to get permission from the students before sharing their work. But it's worth it, especially if students see that other students in the past met your requirements and were rewarded accordingly. Written assignment instructions should be continually revised. Draft and expect to revise at least once before using in a real class. Expect to revise instructions semester after semester in response to student feedback. If providing feedback on student work is important, then assignment instructions are a crucial foundation for that work. Moreover, vague instructions can demoralize students. You may think, it's okay, I don't plan on grading the assignment too strictly anyway. But students may not know or believe that and can become demoralized or cynical if they don't have a clear idea of what you want from them. As a professor, you are a leader and students will follow you provided they think you're leading them somewhere constructive. You might include assignments with a rubric or checklist. We'll discuss rubrics in a moment, but for now think of this. What if you gave your students a checklist of all the things you need to see in an assignment submission in order for it to receive an A or a passing grade, or even for you to accept it as completed work that you will grade and read? You can even have students submit it back to you as a cover sheet with the completed assignment. A checklist may only cover mechanics, so you don't need to waste time and ink checking for things, making comments, or organizing what they may hand in. Page numbers, a title, other front matter, a bibliography, proper spelling, grammar, punctuation, formatting in, say, MLA style, and so on, can be listed out so students understand that these are part of their final grade. You might even include higher-level objectives on the checklist. Did they use certain sources? Did they have topic sentences that support a central thesis? Do they include complete and properly formatted diagrams or graphs that illustrate or calculations that show their work process? Does their submission appear aimed at your assignment objectives at all, or are they handing in something that looks like it was really in response to something other than your assignment prompt? There's no guarantee every student will do everything on a checklist, but it makes clear to students what you want to see and discourages students from submitting subpar work just to have done with it. A checklist can be part of what is really an additional and a firm practice, a no-go policy, a threshold for student work below which you will not accept or grade assignment submissions. This can prevent you from wasting time on work that lacks some basic elements or attention to practice. You can tell students that if they haven't completed an assignment in accordance with your instructions, and perhaps included everything on a checklist, you simply won't accept it. And then, officially, it was not handed in and is subject to a 0 grade if they don't resubmit with the minimum standards completed. Faculty frequently complain that a lot of time is consumed when grading student work that is basically incomplete or insufficiently serious. You might exact a late penalty, or you may decide to forego that for the sake of encouraging better work. But either way, you won't waste time doing the mental labor your students should have attempted to do themselves before they handed in incomplete work. Obviously, be careful with a no-go policy or declining student work. If a student didn't put in a level of effort you know they're capable of doing, then proceed. But perhaps the student lacks skills or insights that are preventing them from tackling the assignment. It's not impossible that the student got to college without sufficient reading comprehension skills, study strategies, or some other explicit or implicit prerequisite. Or maybe there's an atypical learning problem involved that's preventing the student from comprehending the assignment instructions. If you identify this, either grade the student's work and address that in the feedback, or direct the students to the Writing Center, Tutoring Center, or other support services on campus. The goal of a no-go policy shouldn't be to exact satisfying retribution on lazy or contentious students. Rather, it's to firmly encourage them to take the learning process seriously, either on the assignment or the next, while efficiently marshaling your time and energy for students that are trying to learn. Traditionally, providing feedback is time and energy consuming. You feel exhausted after grading student work. But not all feedback needs to be extensive or intensive, and you might find ways to make it easier for you and perhaps more effective in the process. Let's look at some more structured or mechanical means to streamline the feedback process. Multiple choice quizzes are a common assignment type in many fields. Traditionally, they might be anticipated or unannounced at the beginning of the class. Professors are usually aware of their limitations. They can only provide a basic sense to both instructor and student of how much and how well the student has done in the reading. If you use classroom quizzes, they cost class time and can be a chore to print and grade. Some faculty use automated online quizzes, or really worksheets built into D2L's quiz toolset to incentivize students to read. The questions are generally easy to accumulate over several semesters, and if D2L is serving and grading them via the web, multiple choice quizzes can be near effortless for you. D2L can serve questions from larger banks at random, thereby discouraging stronger students from simply providing answers to their friends in the class. D2L allows students multiple attempts, where they can revisit questions they got wrong to try again. And D2L can even provide canned text feedback for individual questions or chosen answers. Obviously, these kinds of worksheet exercises have limitations, but they are generally low effort to use and low stress assignments that can provide students some basic sense of how well they're doing in some parts of the class. Rubrics can be regarded as another form of structured feedback, but they're more sophisticated, and are really one step up from checklists discussed earlier. You know this drill by now. A series of assignment criteria are rows, while levels of student achievement are columns. D2L makes the process simple by allowing you to click boxes to rapidly choose the level for each criteria when grading a student's submission within a Dropbox. Rubrics really merit their own podcast episode, but a few things can be said here. They are typically challenging to write, and even more than simple text assignment prompts require regular revision semester after semester, at least until a rubric has become a finely honed instrument. Faculty find themselves chafing at the limits imposed by tabular rubrics, believing that a more nuanced interpretation and decision involving student work is necessary, at least in their discipline. On the other hand, they can be a helpful tool for a tired professor's brain, both to provide meaningful feedback to students and to help the instructor organize and sharpen her thoughts on any particular student submission. Plus, by taking the trouble to write a rubric, you must determine exactly the things you want students to do or to produce, and how important each thing is in their submitted work. So they help faculty develop more effective assessments that better serve the learning goals and objectives of their course. Rubrics can also be helpful for providing consistent grades and feedback processes for multiple instructors teaching the same course. Lastly, rubrics are arguably preemptive feedback if distributed to students as part of the assignment prompt. A student knows exactly how an assignment is going to be assessed and what priorities are involved. Since many of our students have seen rubrics in K-12 education, they're familiar with the process. They know the drill. On several occasions, I had students ask me if I had rubrics for particular assignments. Since then, I've developed them. While I recognize that they may have limitations, I find they help students focus on my intent in my assignments, what I want them to do and learn. Plus, D2L makes them easy to work with. Anything that can reduce the time and mental energy we spend on feedback, or rather make that time and energy more productive, is essential. For one thing, you probably know that feedback is more effective if it is delivered as soon as possible. Students are more likely to read what you have to say if the assignment is still relatively fresh in their memory, and if they have time to apply your feedback to subsequent work in the same course. So the faster you get your student work back into their hands, with however much feedback is appropriate, the better. If you assign similar or scaffolded assignments regularly or frequently, this is also a big help. The more frequently students practice skills, the better. With your feedback, they'll get better at doing this work and more quickly acquire confidence. Lots of low-grade, low-stakes assignments cut down on stress, so students can focus on the substance of learning rather than fret over what the next assignment might do to their course grade. I think we all know that confidence and mindset are crucial. Students need to believe that learning, improving their skills, and acquiring proficiency are plausible. There are books, articles, TED Talks, and lots of other media on this topic. Here we'll just say that you need to be sure your tone in your feedback is appropriate and efficient. As you write comments to students, always imply that you are confident that they can do better, and you expect them to. Implicitly or explicitly suggest that you believe they can and will make the most of your feedback. Whether discussing their accomplishments or problems in their work, focus on the assignment requirements and specific aspects of their work in relationship. Avoid making statements about students as persons, since even if these are positive, such as, "You're really smart," it may not be taken the way you intended it by the recipient or other students who become aware of the comment. Avoid sarcasm or snark. We see plenty of that on the internet, and it's never as witty or impressive to recipients as to the writer. While humor is okay, leave out biting or sneering comments, since you might be misunderstanding why a student has done poor work. And if it's the worst case and the student doesn't care about the assignment, your course, or your discipline, you will neither impress them nor change their mind anyway. Whenever possible, if students get things right, tell them so. This isn't just about being positive or boosting their self-esteem, although both of those are legitimate goals. Students frequently aren't sure if they're doing a good job. So even on a great student assignment submission, where you need only to point out perhaps a grammar correction or two, say something more than just those corrections in a bland, "Great job." You needn't write paragraphs, but return to the assignment objectives. Did the student make a persuasive argument or compelling marketing pitch? Did the student follow the most efficient path to an answer or target outcome? In a single sentence, with some commas, you might provide more than just a vague reassurance. For example, "Your essay is persuasive and you have good evidence, organization, and topic sentences." Done. Where you might have a lot of comments to help students fix problems, overcome weaknesses, and do better, provide them with a few actionable steps. Both of these are crucial: few and actionable. Imagine how enthused you would be if one of your students came to you days after you handed back reports or essays, asking for a few minutes of your time to discuss her plan to do better at whatever it is she did in your assignment. You'd skip lunch for that meeting. Maybe you've been fortunate enough to have that student in your class. Instead of telling students everything wrong with their assignment, how about helping them focus on their efforts on fixing a few problems or mastering a few skills the next time around? Heavily marked up papers present a number of problems. Some students just get discouraged, and this leads them to only make half-hearted attempts at improving their subsequent work. Others may make an honest effort to fix all that you've identified as wrong, but they do not give much thought to larger, more structural issues such as argument, content, organization, and so on. These students often simply fix things in order, going down each page as quickly as they can. Altogether, too comprehensive feedback can also lead your students to believe that their task is simply to fix whatever you identify and nothing else, and not give the whole affair much further thought. Lastly, you may find yourself in the habit of just suggesting language changes rather than taking more time to describe what is wrong with every issue you identify. If it's a draft they must revise before handing in again, they'll simply view it as an exercise in doing something anywhere red ink is spilled and not bother learning anything from the experience. Sometimes a paper or project has a fundamental problem, A student wrote an opinion piece instead of a research paper, in that they neither cited nor mentioned sources. Or a student fundamentally misunderstood or neglected a writing prompt and wrote something else entirely. Or perhaps their basic problems with the experiment that was the basis for the report. You may even legitimately ask the student, what is the purpose of the assignment? Or what is the problem you need to solve here? It's not uncommon that a student does a credible job, but answers the wrong question or attempts to solve the wrong problem. It might simply be a case of redirecting them back to the prompt and purpose, which is a valuable lesson in itself. Even if their work is basically on track, you probably can choose the top few issues that they should work on in the future. It looks like they have an argument, but failed to properly organize their evidence into logical paragraphs with topic sentences. There are some sentence construction issues, but maybe on this short paper you'll just stick to focusing their efforts on the organization problem and get them to work on paragraph construction and organization on the next assignment coming up. Or a student has formatting issues with graphs, but you're seeing a more fundamental calculation problem that you'd rather they focus on this coming assignment next time around. Perhaps a student business plan has some bad math, but you're more concerned that they are misunderstanding some market analysis and want them to revisit that before proceeding further in your course. In these cases, address the few problems that seem most important, and for now, table the lesser items. After all, if a student completely missed the point of the assignment, there's little sense in commenting at length on sentence construction. If you're having trouble deciding what to address, well, just pick any of them so long as it's a few. And explain to students that you are doing that. You can briefly itemize other concerns so they're aware of them and might choose to investigate them on their own. In such things as grammar, punctuation, or calculation issues, you might simply tell them to consult the writing or tutoring center. But indicate to each student what they should focus on as their primary goal next, sooner rather than later. Wherever possible, direct your comments back towards your learning goals, objectives, and stated aims of the assignment and course. Make clear to them that your criticisms and directions for improvement are in line with bigger ways you want to help them learn and develop as creators or thinkers. This also reassures students that you are not simply looking for ways to take off points. If you have only a few items you want students to focus on, you can afford to be specific in support of them. So, for example, instead of just writing things like awkward or confusing, try to be specific in describing the problem in their work. For example, when you wrote that Frida did not like Aldo's brother, but she respected him, I'm uncertain if you meant that she respected Aldo or Aldo's brother. Or another example, you have a great set of graphs, but each uses a different longitudinal scale, so for a reader they aren't directly comparable. Why not use the same scale? These kinds of comments ensure that a student understands what you are saying. It's also action-oriented. Your work can be improved in these specific places and ways, instead of just, here's what's wrong with your work. And that's crucial. Encourage the student to think in terms of next steps or actions. If you've built multiple similar or scaffolded assignments into your class, then students can employ feedback on earlier assignments to do better on later assignments. And as I mentioned before, you can also track students' progress along the lines you suggested in that feedback. If on a later assignment they've clearly overcome a problem you identified earlier in their work, that is, by definition, learning, and you have excellent evidence that learning has taken place. But in providing concise, actionable feedback, make sure you aren't doing your students' work for them. Suggesting a better turn of phrase in one or two places is fine, but resist the urge to rewrite much of their text, or perform calculations in the margin, or even identify every instance of a type of problem. Remember, you can always use a single example to support a bit of direction that applies to multiple instances in a work, provided you tell the student that they must identify and remedy other instances of that same problem. If a student simply neglected something in course readings or other materials, direct them back to it with a question like, where in the textbook chapter was this discussed? Or, what did we conclude in class discussion on this topic? Rather than simply tell them what they should know. Concise, actionable feedback is helpful at any point where students will need to do similar work or revise their work in your class or in your academic program. Practically, you're telling them how to improve their grade in the course. But even if it's the last assignment or final paper and you are grading at the end of the semester, having a few concise next steps is more likely to earn their attention than pouring on with extensive red ink. Good feedback may prompt further conversation with a student, and that's a good thing. Encourage students in general statements and within extensive feedback to ask questions in response to feedback. This can feel risky or troublesome, as if you're inviting argument. But when your student asks questions about your feedback, this indicates they're engaged and must have read it. Moreover, it gives you insight as to how they understood the assignment, your feedback, and the problems they're having. This may afford you an opportunity to provide them with even better direction. If you discuss their work with a student and find that for some reason the student is struggling to understand your feedback, consider describing to the student what you think they attempted to do. If you can agree with them on that, it can help clear up a misconception they may have that is confusing them as they read or listen to your feedback. This can be especially effective for process assignments such as mathematics or professional procedures. Now, if you decide to try out providing a few next steps for students in your feedback, among the things you may leave out are the usual suspects: grammar, spelling, formatting, and other mechanics. Some professors refuse to neglect these, feeling that too often other instructors do that, and the result is students are inept or indifferent to these concerns. But many of us become exhausted making comments and corrections on student work for grammar, sentence construction, and spelling, as well as MLA or APA formatting, page numbers, conventions for charts and graphs, and various other discipline-specific mechanics. What else can we do? For one, consider a threshold for these things. When evaluating students' work, at what point will you decide that it is sufficiently sloppy you won't go further? The student has not handed in a finished submission. They need to proofread and possibly seek editorial assistance at a campus writing or tutoring center before handing in their work. This could legitimately be a no-go issue for you. Another option is to make it one of the few things you focus on in actionable feedback, especially if the student has some identifiable specific problems rather than just careless work. For example, you might tell the student that she or he should seek help from the Writing Center for avoiding run-on sentences or word choice problems. You can highlight a few examples in their work, but let them know that you haven't underlined or highlighted every example. If this is a draft, they have the opportunity to identify other problems as part of strengthening their writing skills. Now, a lot of what I've said seems to imply that you'll be providing feedback as written or typed commentary. A few words on the mechanics of that and alternatives. Traditionally, instructors wrote in pen on the margins of paper assignments. Nowadays, and especially after the COVID-19 pandemic, many of us collect files digitally, such as via D2L's Dropbox, and even provide comments using D2L's Dropbox tools. D2L's Dropbox and Gradebook have a space for overall feedback or general comments about the entire student submission. The Dropbox toolset also has annotation tools similar to MS Word's Track Changes markup toolset. Turnitin has these built in too. It's a different set, but they're somewhat similar. D2L also makes it easy for students to find what you may have wrote, underlined, highlighted, and so on using these tools. We've got tutorials covering both the instructor and student sides of that process. D2L also has a rubric tool that allows push-button rubric grading, and it can deliver the rubric as part of the initial assignment prompt too. Some faculty resist using it because they think it'll be a chore to figure out and copy the rubric they previously used in, say, an msword.docx file into the D2L rubric tool. Recently, I moved a fairly extensive rubric into D2L, and it took me about 10 minutes. Well worth it, if I was then going to use that rubric for years, even with occasional modifications. You also have the option of recording a video with comments. That's more involved, but some instructors like that option because it captures their tone better than in written comments. If you stick with a few action items as the basis for your feedback on student work, you may find more students actually read and act on your feedback. However, there are a few things you can do specifically to encourage or require this practice. One is what I stated above. Have a set of assignments that are quite similar throughout the semester. Make clear that the feedback they receive early is specifically helpful in doing better on the later assignments. You might even drop the earliest or lowest grade to make clear that they can get the full benefit of early feedback to end with a strong course grade. For larger projects or assignments, as part of scaffolding, you might ask students to submit a brief plan for how they will implement your feedback directions. This can just be a restatement, in their own words, of what problems or possibilities you identified in their work, a description of how they will do things differently next time, or a specific list of next steps in revising a draft. You might even ask them to prioritize or list the order of importance things you said or identified in your feedback. This compels students to reflect on your feedback and allows you to assess the extent to which they have constructive habits toward feedback and how well they understood your feedback. You might even supply a tailored worksheet or short list of questions to help them be more specific about their next course of action. This helps avoid vague plans like study harder or practice more. So, to sum up, there are ways you can make your feedback on student assignment submissions more efficient and effective. Using structured feedback instruments like short quizzes, checklists, and rubrics can speed up grading and provide feedback or even remove these things as a chore altogether. Focusing feedback on complex assignments into a few actionable things students should target in future work makes it easier for them to employ your feedback and even gives you a better chance to track their progress. Being mindful of your tone and avoiding bad habits such as doing student work for them are also key elements. Even if you spend more time providing feedback on student work, that's not a bad investment. It may be worth doing that instead of spending so much time preparing ponderous lectures or assigning more reading than your students and you can practically manage for class discussions and exam preparation. If we stop thinking about providing feedback as just part of the grading process and therefore a necessary evil, and start considering it as a major component of students' learning opportunities in our courses, we may find that students learn more and present more evidence that they've learned more in our classes. Thank you for listening to the Canisius Pedagogy Primer podcast. Relevant links can be found in show notes. For more helpful resources for teaching and learning, visit www.canisius.edu/COLI.